Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. With the federal government in chaos, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took a few shots at Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. With Chrystia Freeland resigning from cabinet, we asked Sun political columnist Brian Lilley if he thinks Prime Minister Justin Trudeau may be next. And we hear from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which explains how the federal government's massive debt will impact Canadians for years.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Political observers say the Trudeau Liberals are heading into the Christmas holiday break in a state of chaos. The fall sitting ended today, but Parliament was upended by the surprise resignation of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland on Monday. The move has shaken Justin Trudeau's strength as both Prime Minister and party leader, with a number of Liberal MPs calling for his resignation. In fact, one Liberal MP says Trudeau is in a delusional false reality. Now, the opposition leaders are taking things a step further, calling for an election right now before Donald Trump heads back to the White House next month. Prime Minister Trudeau spoke to supporters at a Liberal Party fundraiser in Gatineau, Quebec. Now, instead of addressing the chaos within his own party, he took the opportunity to take a few shots at Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
Pierre Poilievre is uninterested in building more homes, delivering vital supports, creating good jobs, or even, as we saw with his opposition to our GST tax break, he's opposed to even cutting taxes. That's a given with the Conservative Party. But what makes Poilievre different is that he's willing to actively bet against Canadians and Canada. He says Canada is broken while actually trying his damnedest to break it.
Dominic LeBlanc, a longtime friend of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, took the oath of office to become Canada's new finance minister. He will also remain on as Canada's Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. LeBlanc replaces Chrystia Freeland, who resigned from cabinet on Monday after Trudeau told her he was moving her out of finance into another portfolio.
I look forward to working with Canada's premiers as I have for the last number of years on some important challenges facing the country. I'm also thinking tonight of the remarkable women and men who work in the public safety portfolio, in the department and in the agencies. I've been inspired by their work over the last year and a half, and I look forward to hopefully continuing to support them in the work that they do for Canadians.
Now, many Canadians are discussing the current turmoil within the Trudeau Liberal caucus right now. Chrystia Freeland resigning from cabinet, Housing Minister Sean Fraser announcing that he won't be seeking re-election. So we asked Sun political columnist Brian Lilley, will Justin Trudeau be the next one to step down?
I don't think so. But this is the biggest parlor game in Canadian politics right now. It has been for a while. When's Justin Trudeau going to leave? I was talking with one Liberal at an event here in Toronto, and they said, if your finance minister leaving can't kill you off, maybe nothing can. So, is Justin Trudeau remaining the Teflon Don of Canadian politics, where nothing's really going to touch him?
Mr. Lilley will also discuss how a number of premiers at the First Ministers meeting are big supporters of Alberta's oil and gas sector. He'll have details coming up later in our broadcast. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says the clown show that is the Trudeau government needs to come to an end. Poilievre says the more this government spends, the worse off Canadians will be. He also took a shot at NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, saying his actions have been quite hypocritical.
The dollars that our people work so hard to earn, that our pensioners contributed to their plans so much so that they could use, are worth less because of the chaos and clown show of Justin Trudeau and the NDP Liberals. And then there is the NDP. Yesterday, Jagmeet Singh had the audacity to claim that he thinks Trudeau should resign after Singh voted just last week to keep Trudeau in power. I put forward a non-confidence motion which would have fired Trudeau and triggered an axe the tax election. And I put in that motion the words of Jagmeet Singh, and he voted against his own words. And now that those votes are behind him, he changes his story entirely. And of course, the media gives him an absolutely free ride, not questioning him at all on the obvious contradiction of claiming a man should be fired when you vote in the House of Commons to keep him in the job.
As you've heard on Bridge City News, the federal budget deficit has ballooned from $40 billion to almost $62 billion. This will make things that much tougher on Canadians moving forward. That's according to Franco Terrazzano, who's the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He joins us now from Ottawa to explain why there may be tougher times ahead for us. Franco, how will this close to $62 billion budget deficit really impact Canadians?
For starters, let's just remember that Trudeau went $20 billion over budget with his deficit, right? He promised that he would keep the deficit at or below $40 billion. The actual deficit, about $62 billion. So that was his own fiscal guardrail, and he just drove his deficit through his own guardrail and went over budget by $20 billion with this deficit. Now, all this means higher taxes. Remember, Trudeau has been trying to paper over his massive deficits by taking more money from Canadians. And it also means more of your money wasted on debt interest charges. So debt interest charges are now costing taxpayers more than $1 billion every single week. In fact, every dollar you pay in federal sales tax now goes to paying interest on Trudeau's government debt.
So, Franco, where are we at when it comes to our national debt?
Our debt is now going to be almost $1.3 trillion. Now, what's so crazy about that is that when Trudeau first became prime minister in 2015, the debt was $616 billion. So in less than a decade, Trudeau has doubled the debt. More money wasted on interest charges, massive deficits, and higher taxes.
So does the government really have a plan in place to lower the debt or deficit? What's the plan moving forward?
That's a great question. I mean, the problem is the government has no plan to save money or balance the budget. Now, you might remember back in 2015, Trudeau said he'd run, a couple modest deficits and balance the budget by 2019. Well, he missed that target by about $20 billion. Now, fast forward, and the deficit last year reached $62 billion. And according to the parliamentary budget officer, under the status quo, the next balanced budget from Ottawa won't be until 2040. So more money wasted on interest charges. And if this government doesn't actually cut spending, well, then Canadians' kids and grandkids will be making payments on Trudeau's debt for the rest of their lives.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. Canada Post trucks, conveyors, and mail carriers are moving once again following a month-long strike. The Canada Industrial Relations Board ordered the 55,000 postal workers to drop the picket signs and head back to work. Still, the dispute between the Crown Corporation and its workers simmers, with issues such as wage increases and a push for weekend deliveries unresolved. The government has appointed an Industrial Inquiry Commission to look into the sticking points and come up with recommendations by May 15th on how a new agreement can be secured. Stats Canada released their third quarter population estimate for 2024 on Tuesday. The national population is now estimated at just over 41.4 million people. Now that's an increase of over 176,000, with 124,000 listed as new immigrants. This has been the slowest population growth seen since the first quarter of 2022. Now here in Alberta, however, our province saw the highest growth by percentage in the country, with a 0.9% increase to over 4.9 million people. That is up another 42,000 since the last quarter. BC, meanwhile, saw a 0.4% increase. Saskatchewan went up 0.6%, and Manitoba 0.4%. Ontario saw a slight increase of 0.3%, and Quebec was up 0.5%. In Atlantic Canada, increases range from 0.1 to 0.4%, and in the territories, they had an average of 0.4% increase. Immigration continued to drive the vast majority of increases as the country's fertility rate hit a record low of 1.26 children per woman. Well, it was overcast and snowy for most of the day here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at our forecast. Jeanette, the light flurry should continue for what, a little while longer?
Yeah, those should start up again late tonight with light snow continuing through Wednesday. Also, a risk of freezing rain beginning near noon tomorrow, and a little bit cooler, or actually, we're still in the minuses, but warmer than today was. However, that -4 could still feel like -10 with the wind chill factor, with winds getting up to about 50 kilometers per hour tomorrow. But, you know, I'll be back later in the show with that 7-day forecast, which will include our Christmas forecast, and I'd say by the looks of things, we could have a brown Christmas.
Great, thanks so much. Fresh off the announcement that the Alberta government is phasing out photo radar as a cash cow, comes word that Lethbridge police are implementing 42 additional new photo radar stations at playground zones throughout the city. Now, starting on January the 13th, they'll be set up near city playgrounds and operating daily from 7:30 a.m. till 9 p.m. The Alberta government initially prohibited municipalities from adding photo radar stations, but has since lifted the ban earlier this month. LPS removed 27 stations that are no longer compliant with the new provincial photo radar policies. Now, here's a follow-up to a story we first brought you on Monday. Lethbridge police are investigating a reported threat at the Lethbridge Collegiate Institute. On Monday, LPS were contacted by staff at LCI about a written threat on the school property that directed harm at students and staff on December the 19th. An investigation is ongoing into the severity of the threat and who initially wrote it. Police will continue their presence at the school for the time being while classes continue, and no further information is being released about the investigation at this time. Police in Red Deer were called to 3 bomb threats at city schools. Administrators with St. Joseph's High School, St. Francis of Assisi Middle School, and Pines Alternative School received threatening emails on both Sunday and Monday. Police searched the buildings and confirmed the threats were not credible. They say the emails may have originated from outside of Canada. You know, it's difficult to think that there are people in our world who are intentionally trying to hurt kids. On Bridge City News, we've often covered a number of shocking stories that have taken place even right here in Lethbridge. Thankfully, we have an organization that helps those who've been victims of sexual assault. Christine Cassey, CEO of the Chinook Sexual Assault Centre, shares some surprising statistics on sexual assaults committed against children here in our country.
What we know from the stats, both from a prevalence study that was done through the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Services and stats that we get through policing agencies and child welfare agencies across Canada, is that it impacts about 1 in 3 kids. And so we look at a 34% prevalence rate really for child sexual abuse alone. In the city of Lethbridge, that would mean about 6,800 kids that may be impacted by some form of sexual abuse or some sort of sexual violation. So these are really staggering numbers that we're dealing with. We also know that this is one of the leading issues that leads to, when the trauma hasn't been resolved, that leads to sexual assault later in life. So there's a direct connection of what's going on here.
Make sure you catch the entire interview with Christine Cassey from the Chinook Sexual Assault Centre and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. Police say the shooter who attacked a Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin, was a 15-year-old girl who was a student at the school. A teacher and a student were killed in the attack on Monday morning at Abundant Life Christian School. Police say 6 others were also injured. The shooter, who died, allegedly turned the gun on herself. Abundant Life Christian School is a K-12 school that serves around 420 students. Officials say it planned to close for Christmas vacation after this week. Overspending in healthcare is driving up a projected shortfall in Manitoba. The provincial government is expected to post a deficit of $1.3 billion for the fiscal year. That is up around $800 million that was tabled in the 2023-24 budget. The province's finance minister says it is still an improvement from the nearly $2 billion deficit that was posted last year. The government is forecasting $438 million in health overspending, driven mainly by high costs in health authorities. Friends and family of a Saskatoon girl struck and killed by a truck 3 years ago say they're frustrated with the judge's decision to stay the charge against the driver. The judges ruled that the case was not handled within a reasonable time frame. Now, the matter exceeded the 18-month limit due to delays caused by the pandemic. Taylor Kennedy was charged in September of 2021 with impaired driving, killing 9-year-old Bailey Maurice at a crosswalk. Supporters say that justice was not served and the system failed the family. The Salvation Army here in Lethbridge is showcasing an Advent art gallery at their worship center. The artwork, which features prints from American artist Scott Erickson, are inspired of his artistic interpretation of the Christmas story. An official with the Salvation Army says the artist creatively visualizes the story of Jesus coming down to earth as an infant.
His book is actually called Honest Advent. So I think when you look at the paintings, when you read the reflections, it just gives a really raw description of what Christmas meant 2,000 years ago and what it means for us today. The fact that God, in his infinite wisdom and infinite power, would come to earth as a helpless baby. It's something that I think we've lost the awe, we've lost the wonder of it. So that's what we're trying to, I guess, reinstill, is just the awe and wonder of that first Christmas.
You can stop by the Salvation Army anytime between 8:30 and 4:30 p.m. until December 20th to check it out for yourself. You know, many years ago, Moravian missionaries named the Pennsylvania city of Bethlehem after the birthplace of Jesus on Christmas Eve way back in 1741. Close to 300 years later, Moravians continue celebrating their Christmas season tradition.
So the Christmas Puts is a treasured tradition of the Moravians. It is a nativity scene. So all of the Christmas stories displayed with tiny figurines and lights and narration. It's a tradition that started way back in the Middle Ages when folks couldn't read or write as much, but eventually became a tradition that was carried out in people's homes. In 1937, the Puts was started first in the Hotel Bethlehem and then soon moved up to Central Moravian Church, but using some of the antique figurines that were carved in Germany and also some more modern ones as well. Well, back in the more Victorian age, you did go putzing, so you would go from house to house and visit each other's putzes and share cookies and those kind of friendships over the holiday season. Now, some people still do that, but often people will make coming to Central's puts as part of their holiday tradition.
For 20 years, residents living on Lima, Peru's Monte Abruzzo Street have lit up their balconies and gardens for Christmas. Now, for a second year, the local government is crowning residents with a Best Decoration Award.
Bueno, es una tradición que tiene más de 20 años. Ya es una tradición donde vienen todas las familias a poder disfrutar de las luces de cada una de las casas y edificios.
Los vecinos empezaron a decorar sus fachadas y cada vez lo hicieron con sus propios recursos, pusieron más luces y la única motivación era que la gente pase, vea y se asombre y que los niños estén felices pasando por un sitio que parece un sitio mágico.
It's starting to look a lot like Christmas in Lima, Peru, and here in Lethbridge too, thanks to all of the snow we received. And that snowy trend should continue for the short term here in our region. Full weather details are coming up. Well, we've been receiving more of the white stuff here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Fortunately, Jeanette, it's been more of the light, fluffy snow as opposed to the heavy, wet snow, which is so much harder and heavier to shovel.
Well, that's for sure. It wasn't even that bad this morning with the cars, with the windshields. It was not even scraping, more like a light brushing. So not too bad. More of that snow, though, is on the way this evening. And then through Wednesday, we could see that light snow. And then by noon, we could see that risk of freezing rain. So -4 is the expected high tomorrow. But then the sun should shine after that. -5 expected on Thursday with clear skies. And then look at this, we're getting right up into the pluses there. 10 degrees on Friday, Saturday looking at a high of 8 degrees, same thing for Sunday. Monday at 9 degrees, and you know what, I peaked a little bit further than that. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day should both be in the pluses, so it's very possible that we could have that brown Christmas. Average high for this time of year, -1, average low, -12. 15 was the record high on this day happening back in 1923, and look at that, 1924, 100 years ago, we saw the record low, which was -39. Sun rose this morning at 8:24, sunset this evening at 4:32, actually I should say this afternoon. Feels like the evening by the time 4:30 rolls around with the darkness, but we are seeing 1 minute less daylight today than yesterday, so 8 hours, 8 minutes Okay, so after some heavy rains today and tonight, Victoria seeing more clear skies tomorrow, 9 degrees for the high. Some light showers ending around noon tomorrow in Vancouver, 10 for the high. Edmonton, some snowfall there, 5 to 10 centimeters, minus 20 for the expected high, minus 11 in Calgary, also seeing some snowfall there as well. And then across the prairies, lots of frostbite warning. In fact, in Saskatoon, frostbite in minutes, as with the wind chill, minus 43 is what it's going to feel like, but the daytime high of minus 19, 5 to 10 centimeters expected there tomorrow. Same thing in Regina, 5 to 10 centimeters, minus 16 the expected high, minus 20 in Winnipeg. With the wind chill, going to feel much colder, but at least we're going to see the sunshine there, so that's the plus. As we look to the rest of the country here in the central portion, we're seeing 2 centimeters of snow in both Toronto and Ottawa tomorrow, and looking at those plus temperatures too, which is lovely. High of 3 in Toronto, 1 in Ottawa, 3 degrees as well in Montreal. Montreal seeing some light snow and could be changing to rain there as well. So snow and rain mixed together. 5 for the high in Fredericton, 6 in Halifax. Both of those seeing increasing clouds. Clear skies expected tomorrow in Charlottetown with a high of 4 degrees. And up to 70K winds in St. John's tomorrow, 7 for the high though. And looking at rain there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The Canadian Mint announced that Canadian legend Terry Fox will be on the new $5 bill. The athlete and activist who ran the Marathon of Hope back in the early 1980s helped to raise close to $25 million towards cancer care and research before he passed away. Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West expressed his immense pride in their hometown hero being honored this way. Terry Fox will replace Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who will now appear on the next version of the $50 bill. Inflation in Canada dropped to 1.9% in November. That is down from 2% from the month before. Stats Canada released its Consumer Price Index report on Tuesday, showing shelter costs increased at a slower annual pace of 4.6%. Rent price inflation, meanwhile, increased to 7.7%. Grocery prices continue to grow faster than overall prices, rising 2.6% from a year ago. Inflation has hovered around the Bank of Canada's 2% target for several months now, clearing the path for more potential interest rate cuts. Canada's annual pace of housing starts in November was up 8% compared with October. The National Housing Agency says the seasonally adjusted annual rate came in at 262,443 units in November. The increase was attributed to strength in multi-unit starts in Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 27 points on the day to finish at 25,119. The Dow was down 267 points to 43,449. The S&P 500 was down 23 to 6050, and the Nasdaq was down 64 points to finish at 20,109. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 42 cents to 70.29 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 15 cents to 3.37 US. Gold was down 5.54 to 26.4608 US an ounce, and silver was up 2 cents to 30.53 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.32 per bushel, barley is at $6.62, canola is at $13.45, and corn is at $7.90 per bushel. Live cattle were up 22 cents to $192.25. Feeder cattle January contract was up $1.92 to $257.47. Lean hogs February contract was down 35 cents to 83.20, and the Canadian dollar was up over the past 24 hours at 69.90 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, political observers say the Trudeau Liberals are heading into the Christmas holiday break in a state of chaos. The fall sitting ended today, but Parliament was upended by the surprise resignation of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland on Monday. The move has shaken Justin Trudeau's strength as both Prime Minister and party leader, with a number of Liberal MPs calling for his resignation. In fact, one Liberal MP says Trudeau is in a delusional false reality. The opposition leaders are taking things a little further, calling for an election now before Donald Trump heads back to the White House next month. You know, with all of this political turmoil in Ottawa with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, will he actually maybe take a long walk in the snow and resign like his father did? Political columnist Brian Lilly will offer up his thoughts on that topic in just a few moments. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. The big news that has a lot of Canadians talking right now is the resignation of Chrystia Freeland from Cabinet. And is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau possibly next? To talk about this in more detail is Sun political columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. So Brian, there are a number of Liberal MPs who are also wanting Trudeau to resign. Will it actually happen before next year's federal election?
I don't think so. But this is the biggest parlor game in Canadian politics right now. It has been for a while. When's Justin Trudeau going to leave? I was talking with one Liberal at an event here in Toronto, and they said, if your finance minister leaving can't kill you off, maybe nothing can. So, is Justin Trudeau remaining the Teflon Don of Canadian politics, where nothing's really going to touch him? You look at the video that I'm sure many people have seen of him leaving his office in Longement Block on Monday night, and he's headed to the Liberal fundraiser, and he's being heckled. People screaming, how dare you? You betrayed Canada. You need to leave. He just turns and smiles and looks at them like nothing bad happened to me today. This is not a guy who has been humbled or humiliated in any way, shape, or form. And he believes, I've said it before, he has a messianic complex about himself. He thinks he is the savior of Canada. And before it was saving Canada from Pierre Poilievre, and then misinformation and disinformation, and now Donald Trump. And he's the only one that can do it for us, Hal. He has to save us from ourselves and all these other nasty people. And so Chrystia Freeland may be gone, but I don't think Justin Trudeau's leaving.
Now, let's circle back to Freeland for just a moment here, Brian. How did the Prime Minister's office tell Freeland on Friday that she would be shuffled out of the finance minister portfolio following the fall economic statement?
Very badly. This is one of the worst pieces of political operations I can think of. So you've got a finance minister who has been a loyal foot soldier for you for years, in all kinds of portfolios, has done whatever you've asked, was one of the early people to sign on before it even looked like the Liberals were going to form government. Chrystia Freeland was by Justin Trudeau's side. And they've been leaking to the Globe and Mail specifically for months now, not just the past couple of weeks, but they did this a few months ago. They humiliated her and talked to the Globe and Mail, and it's on the front page of the paper that matters most to someone like Chrystia Freeland, that they want to replace her with Mark Carney. And that doesn't quite happen. Carney doesn't bite. He takes on this new advisory role back in September, though. And then in the past couple of weeks, again, the Prime Minister's office leaking directly to the Globe and Mail that they don't believe that they have confidence in her. They don't feel that she's the right one. They're still trying to court Mark Carney. So all of this is going on, and Freeland knows it, and it's clear that it's a direct leak from the Globe, or to the Globe from the PMO, and it's undermining her with the business community that she oversees as finance minister. So with all of that going on, he tells her via a Zoom call while he's out in British Columbia and she's in Toronto. They have an hour-long Zoom call where he explains that, I want to take you out of finance, and I'm going to give you this new job, though. You're going to be in charge of Canada-U.S. relations. There's no ministry, there's no staff, there's no budget, and there's no authority to make decisions, but you're in charge of it. A couple of things on that. One, she said no to it and then released her scathing letter on Monday morning. We all saw that. But Donald Trump clearly does not like Chrystia Freeland. While she may have some skill and experience in dealing with him and his administration, he dislikes her. Why would you make her the public face of it? So badly handled from Trudeau on all accounts. And so on her way out the door, Freeland drops this bomb at 9:07 a.m. on Monday morning, 23 minutes before a cabinet meeting is supposed to start to discuss the fall economic statement that she's supposed to deliver that day. And she takes all kinds of shots at the Prime Minister on her way out.
What about Trudeau saying that he's a feminist prime minister and he wants to support strong women? We've lost Jody Wilson-Raybould, we've lost Chrystia Freeland and others.
For a long time, I have looked at any man that walks around proudly talking about what a feminist he is as a creepy man who is just trying to make nice with the ladies. We all saw it back in college and university days. Those were the guys who were bad dates. And I've held that opinion since. Doesn't mean that, if you support women or you treat women equally, that's who you are. But the guys who go around, I'm a feminist, if they have to tell you over and over again that they're a feminist, now, don't believe them. And Justin Trudeau has proven this time and again, in that speech last week that caught the attention of our American neighbors and the Trump administration, where he bemoaned the fact that Kamala Harris had been defeated by Donald Trump, and that once again, the United States had chosen not to elect a woman as president. He said talked about what a feminist he is, and women have an ally in him. Well, if you go back just a bit before that in the speech, he boasted about having Chrystia Freeland as his finance minister as proof that he's a feminist. This guy, he's shooting himself in the foot, but Teflon Don of politics, as I say, it doesn't seem to stick, although women voters have left him by a wide margin. I wrote an open letter to Trudeau this week saying, here's why you have to go, and that included looking at the polling. Only 20% of women say they will vote for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, who we've been told for years, well, he has a problem with women, 40% of women say they're going to vote for him. So no, Trudeau now has a problem with women voters. People aren't believing his shtick anymore, but there's no way to get him out.
So, Brian, what do you make of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh demanding that Trudeau resign, but he wouldn't commit to voting down the government? I mean, Singh says, quote, all options are on the table. We've heard that before. But are they really there since Singh is waiting to receive his pension next year?
Jagmeet Singh is the boy who cried wolf. He has been since he signed this agreement with Justin Trudeau, the one that he ripped up but didn't really rip up back in September. Singh put red line after red line while they were still in the coalition and kept saying, well, if you don't do this, we're going to leave. And they wouldn't do it, or they would delay, or they wouldn't do everything that was promised. And he still kept voting for them. He's still voting for them now. I believe it's 8 times he's voted confidence in the Trudeau government since ripping up his agreement with them.
Wow.
So no, he's not going to do anything now. And it was the most ridiculous thing, watching reporters try and get him to say, does he have confidence in the government? No, he just wants Trudeau gone, but he's quite fine with the Liberals staying in government. He doesn't think that there needs to be a clearing of house because he knows he won't win, and he's worried the Conservatives will. So Jagmeet Singh ends up looking rather foolish. And then Peter Julian, his House leader, goes on TV and says, well, we'll consider voting the government down if Justin Trudeau is still the Prime Minister by the end of February or the first week of March. It's a rather specific time. That's also more than a month after the House resumes. Why is that? Oh, because on February 25th, 2025, Jagmeet Singh's pension is vested. Now, some of my colleagues disagree. They say, look, the guy drives a Maserati. He's the Maserati Marxist. He doesn't need a pension. He clearly is hanging on for something. And his own actions are making it look like this is about the pension, the $2.3 million over the next several decades that will flow into his bank account.
Brian, a big speech in Toronto defending Alberta's oil and gas industry. Now, you had a chance to sit down and chat with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith for an interview. Did she discuss her big concerns over the federal government's cap on emissions and production?
Absolutely. And that was a big part of our discussion. It was also a big part of her speech. So this was a speech that was planned out months ago. She knew that she was coming to Toronto for the fall or winter meeting of the Council of the Federation. And it was interesting because they put together they didn't just put Danielle Smith on the stage, they put Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey on the stage, and both of them talking about the problems with these emission caps, what it means for their respective provinces, what the impact is on the rest of the country. And I have to tell you, they both got an interesting and warm reception from the Bay Street crowd. I was just sitting a few tables away from the podium where she was speaking. People were applauding her. They were applauding Premier Furey, even when they were taking shots at the Trudeau Liberal government. That wouldn't have happened a couple of years ago. A lot of these events it's always very clubby. I was at a table with some Liberals, and they were applauding because people are done. So yeah, the emissions caps came up, and in fact, during a fireside chat portion, the moderator said, well, you say it's a production cap. The government says it's an emission cap. Explain it to me why you do it. And she did a very good job of laying out why it's an actual production cap and put it in terms that people here in Central Canada can understand it. don't really have any relation to the oil and gas industry.
Now, Premier Smith has come out and said she has no plans to block oil sales in the face of tariffs from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, Brian. But Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's open to blocking energy exports. Is Ford actually calling to block Alberta oil exports?
Not as far as I know. My understanding of Doug Ford's comments, and Premier Smith and I talked about this off camera while they were setting up for the interview. My understanding of that and hers is that Premier Ford was talking about electricity exports from Ontario to Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York State, places like that. Now, he was not talking about oil, and she told me that he reassured her that when they met on over Sunday and Monday. The problem is, and she raised this concern, and it's a valid one, is that if Ontario shuts down electricity sales to Michigan, Michigan could turn around and say, well, Line 5 goes through our jurisdiction, bringing oil and gas from Western Canada to Sarnia. We're going to shut that down. We're not going to let anything. I mean, they take a lot of it when it gets there. There's distribution, smaller pipelines and distribution hubs and refineries and such. And then much of it goes on to Sarnia. That provides about half or more of the jet fuel that is used at Pearson Airport. The refineries in Sarnia that are fed by Line 5. So if that ends up being shut down, that's huge. And she did say that we've got to be careful about that. So look, Premier Ford, I think, is still striking a good balance. I like how he's handling it. I like how Premier Smith is handling it. I don't agree with these people that say, let's fight the Americans. Let's thump our chest and say, we'll take you on and we'll block everything and tariff anything. If you're saying that, you're in the laptop class who is not going to be impacted by natural resource production shutting down, by manufacturing shutting down, by agriculture shutting down. You're just going to sit there and continue to write reports on PowerPoint and make presentations to people over Zoom and get paid. But everyone else is going to be impacted in a big way. So Ford is being a bit more aggressive, but I'll tell you this, he did get noticed by Trump. He's been doing, like Premier Smith, she was just on Fox News today. She told me about 4 interviews. Doug Ford has done a bunch of interviews in the States, including with friends of Trump, and it's getting noticed. And Trump did say when he was at the New York Stock Exchange opening, I hope to catch a deal with Canada. He's still toying with Justin Trudeau, and he posted on social media about Chrystia Freeland quitting and that the governor of the great state of Canada had lost his finance minister. So he's still trolling there, but I think he's listening to what the premiers are saying. It's sad that we have to rely on premiers for national leadership like this.
And Brian, it appears as though we're seeing more leadership from premiers in dealing with Trump's border concerns than we appear to be seeing from Ottawa and the Trudeau government. Now, there was some money in the fall economic statement to bolster our border, but you say it's not nearly enough?
I don't think so. Look, Alberta itself is putting together, what is it, a $29 million plan, 51 sheriffs, the 2-kilometer zone of interest, I think is what they call it. I'm trying to remember the exact term, drones, sniffer dogs, all of that. That's far more detail than we've seen from the Trudeau government. They've offered $1.3 billion. That may sound like a lot. It's over 6 years, Hal. $1.3 billion over 6 years works out to just shy of $217 million a year on average. The budget increase from last year fiscally to this year fiscally is $35 billion. We're spending $35 billion more, and you can't find something that will help us, deal with the concerns the Americans have raised about our border. If those tariffs go on, we're going to be taking tens of billions of dollars out of the economy. It's going to be wiping out several points of GDP. It'll be devastating. And that will cost an awful lot more than the pittance that Trudeau's putting forward. To me, this says that he is simply not serious. And he may as well call up Donald Trump and say, Donald, I heard what you said about the border, but truth is, I'm not going to do anything. You may as well make the tariffs 50%.
Brian, the Trudeau government expanded its gun ban recently, adding hundreds of new guns to the banned list. And they really emphasized the point during the 35th anniversary of the École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal. Now, there's some odd elements to this expansion, though, including the lack of legislation and the extension of the amnesty period. Can you explain?
They're doing it through order in council. But I mean, they haven't had control of the House of Commons since late September, early October, so they couldn't bring in legislation. Also not sure that they would find a willing dance partner on this. So they're doing it through effectively a cabinet decree. That's not how you pass legislation. Justin Trudeau is a threat to Canadian democracy in more ways than one, and this is one. This is not how our government is supposed to operate. But then the extension of the amnesty, it goes to the end of October 2025. Why? Not because they think these guns are dangerous. They've been in, the basements of your viewers and your friends for the last 4, almost 5 years since he banned the first round of them. They've been in people's basements, in their gun safes, no crime problems. There was just a big gun bust today in Peel Region, which is a big suburban area next to Toronto. And 100% of the guns that are there that they showed were from the United States. They could say that 90% of them were from the United States. And somebody asked, well, what about the other 10%? They said, well, they have their serial numbers removed. So we think they're from the United States, but we can't prove it. Those are the problems. The smuggled handguns coming in from the United States, which, by the way, with all this cross-border talk and tariffs and border security, we could be turning around saying to the Americans, yeah, we'll work with you, but we need you to deal with this. We're not. Trudeau set aside $600 million to, quote unquote, buy back people's guns the government never owned in the first place. Why not put that money towards border security? Why? Well, because Trudeau wants to campaign on it. That's why the amnesty is in place till the next election. That's why he picks on law-abiding gun owners. It's far easier than dealing with the results of his hug-a-thug laws that see repeat violent offenders out on bail again and again.
Sun political columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today and for joining us from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
Child abuse isn't something we typically like to talk about, but I think we can all agree it needs to stop. Joining us today is Christine Cassie. She is the CEO of Chinook Sexual Assault Center in Lethbridge. Christine, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. First off, can you maybe give us a brief overview of what the Chinook Sexual Assault Center does?
Well, the Chinook Sexual Assault Center has two main programs. One is the Sexual Assault Center, which provides a range of services from crisis intervention to therapy, including peer support groups, what we call system navigation. So sometimes people's lives just aren't going as well as what they'd hope they'd be because they're dealing with the impacts of the trauma that they're experiencing. So we'll help negotiate their way through certain systems that they want to deal with. We also provide specialized police and court support as well. So for those people who do want to go forward to report to police, because there's no statute of limitations in Canada, we will support them through that process all the way through to the court process with that as well. Beyond that, we also have our signature program, the Child and Youth Advocacy Center, which is also called Chinook. Can never use that name enough, it seems. Chinook Child and Youth Advocacy Center deals with children 0 to 17 years of age that have been identified through children's services or through policing services throughout southwestern Alberta that have been abused, and either sexually abused, severe physical abuse, or severe neglect, or have been exposed to domestic violence. And so we actually broker the child forensic interviews to be done in a child-friendly, culturally sensitive space that we host, as well as then supporting the non-offending family members and the child throughout the court process and how they learn to heal through therapy and other resources that we have here.
Well, pretty heavy stuff that you're dealing with over there, Christine, for sure. Like I said earlier, child abuse, of course, isn't a topic we love to talk about, but you believe that it is, in fact, important to have those conversations about the issue.
Absolutely. What we know from the stats, both from a prevalence study that was done through the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Services and stats that we get through policing agencies and child welfare agencies across Canada, is that it impacts about 1 in 3 kids. And so we look at a 34% prevalence rate really for child sexual abuse alone. In the city of Lethbridge, that would mean about 6,800 kids that may be impacted by some form of sexual abuse or some sort of sexual violation. So these are really staggering numbers that we're dealing with. death. We also know that this is one of the leading issues that leads to when the trauma hasn't been resolved, that leads to sexual assault later in life. So there's a direct connection of what's going on here. We also know those that have had that exposure to domestic violence, they're seeing that violence in their home, that they're living this out day after day, that this also leads to other behaviors and things that absolutely impact then, how they respond to others as they grow into adult life and how they receive others. So what those healthy relationships may look like. And so our ability to be able to identify, to address, to intervene, we need to do, because if we don't deal with that trauma early, we know that we're setting up for a lifelong struggle.
What are some of the signs that a child may be experiencing abuse? What should we be looking for?
If you're an outsider looking in, sometimes what you may see is, certainly if it's physical abuse, you might see some bruising that really can't be explained on what that is. You might see some withdrawal behaviors are happening where they're not part of their regular or normal activities. You may see disassociation when they're in a school setting where they aren't able to focus. That could be for anything from physical abuse to domestic violence or sexual violence that's happening in the home. But you're going to see these changes in behaviors that are happening that way. For kids that are neglected, you may see that they don't have the proper clothing, they don't have the proper food to eat, things like this. You might see them losing a lot of weight, whatever that might be, and just in a state of neglect in that way. For others, you're seeing them as lost and not really doing so well because they aren't necessarily having those emotional connections where they need them. For any of us looking in, it's important to ask some questions about what's going on. Do you need anything? What might I be able to help with? Asking about how that what's going on. And certainly we see teachers are great for this in being able to recognize things. Schools are a big factor in a child's life, and they help to identify when these types of things are going on. Family members too sometimes get really concerned and will make those calls, those very difficult calls to make. But we know when you make that call, if we can get in, an assessment can be done, we can intervene early. And it doesn't mean that the family is going to be necessarily torn apart. It may mean that they're getting the resources they need to be able to work through some very difficult times, to learn some different behaviors. Some of us grew up in a time where spanking was, pretty much, that was the only parenting style. And although some of us, we may joke about it now, it's really not acceptable anymore to do that. There's other ways that we can parent and discipline our kids, and how we can put healthy boundaries in place to help people, progress. Beyond that is looking at who's having access to our kids and how do we identify when our child might be being groomed. How to identify when our family is being befriended because someone wants to have access to our children in that way. And so knowing some of those signs and what to look for is really important. And again, just knowing that, people are a call away and they really do want to help with that. And that both is through the Sexual Assault Center, the Child and Youth Advocacy Center, and a number of other resources that we have in the city of Lethbridge.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a lot of things there. And of course, it can manifest itself in a number of different ways. Like you were mentioning neglect. I mean, it doesn't just come in the form of physical abuse. So what are some of the main types of child abuse?
Really, we see the predominant thing that we see is actually sexual abuse, which is, probably the scariest of them all. If you talk to people, this is what they shy away from talking the most about, is that this can happen to those that are under the age of 18, and it happens to people of all ages. And it's, people do prey on the vulnerable. And the more vulnerable we are, and children certainly meet that criteria of being vulnerable, there is there are predators that are looking for that. So for us to be able to break that cycle, I'm sorry, to answer your question. So sexual abuse is the main one we're seeing. We're also seeing physical abuse. We're seeing a lot of exposure to domestic violence in this area, emotional neglect and neglect. So those are the 5 primary areas that we're seeing. And again, we deal mostly with the sexual abuse, the severe physical abuse, and the neglect.
Yeah, you were mentioning before some stats there. I'm just curious, how prevalent is it in our society? Did you say 6,800 cases locally?
Well, I said that's what the 34% would work out to when we look at the population of children in the city of Lethbridge. So it is a 34% prevalence rate for sexual abuse itself, let alone for other forms of abuse. But it is like, almost, 1 in 3 children that are experiencing some form of abuse in our society. So it is quite high when we're looking at this. And again, we see the same thing when we look at adults when it comes to sexual assault. It is quite high. And so there's lots of ways that we can intervene and that we need to intervene and really see this and have these fruitful conversations so that people can take the topic seriously and to make those reports, even when they're feeling, I don't want to get involved. We know we all don't want our neighbors to be mad at us or to have that, awful situation, but we always have to put those children first.
Yeah, we kind of have a role as individuals in society to help. Almost like it takes a village to raise a child. It's kind of true in that case, isn't it?
It's absolutely true. I mean, first, it is legislated that we are supposed to doing that. There is, fines that you can receive if you fail to, if you knowingly neglect reporting child abuse that's happening. They rarely take issue with that, but I think morally we have that obligation. And very much like you said, it is a village that raises a child, and we have to be looking out for each other in this society if we really want to make those changes.
Right. Christine, about a year ago or so, the Chinook Sexual Assault Center opened a new facility for the Chinook Child and Youth Advocacy Center. So maybe tell us about some of the features of this new facility and why it's important.
Fantastic. Yes, so this is actually based on 40 years of evidence-based research. It actually originated out of Alabama and is widely used throughout the world, but predominantly in North America. So we're one of, I want to say, 8 child and youth advocacy centers in the province. What a child and youth advocacy center does is that it actually brings all those very messy pieces from police reporting or children's services, the medical exams, the need for psychologists, the school system, all together so that we can actually look at a case of child abuse. We call them triaging child abuse and seeing what those needs are. We can actually walk them through prepare them for a child forensic interview. So there's a process for that. And then actually work on those pathways to treatment and to healing for the child and the family. So the work isn't done independent of the family. It's done with the family, with the child for it to be most successful, and then to see them successfully through the court case. Where the child interview becomes really critical is that quite often children had to tell their story not one time, but several times. So they may be telling it to the doctor, they may be telling it to the police, they may be telling it to children's services. And every time that they're having to tell their story, they're being re-traumatized in that abuse that they've suffered. So having a really well-constructed child forensic interview is paramount to the success of the court case. And so at the end of the day, hopefully you have more people that are able to be convicted of these crimes, which again helps to mitigate those risks to other children. So part of that is we'll identify one interviewer for that child. And if, let's say, if it's police doing the interview, children's services would sit in a monitoring room and be able to get their notes at exactly the same time of what this is. When the tape is really well done, that tape then can be submitted to court as evidence. The child doesn't have to go into court to state what the abuse was. They still have to be cross-examined, but they don't have to state again what they went through. So again, you limit the number of times the child has to speak directly to the type of abuse that they endured.
Right. That's amazing. And that's the case with any victim that has to go through this again and again. Is there any thoughts on that happening for anybody that's been through a horrific situation?
Absolutely. Well, even, there's always a misnomer when people think that they have to come to a sexual assault center, they have to tell us all the details of the sexual assault, and you don't. We aren't secondary witnesses to the crime. We know it's horrible. We believe you, and we just want to know how you're doing and how you need to get to that next step of where you want to be. So that's what we're here for. And so I think there is, police are much more trauma informed than what they were before on this. And so this is why this model is widely adopted throughout North America. Is we want to do better by the kids, and we know if we can do better with the children, we're going to do better with the adults in time. That we're actually going to circumvent children growing up to being abused yet again and again, or the possibility that other harm is going to be done to other people. And so these are those ways to actually mitigate those types of risks in our society and to help people really thrive, because everyone needs that fair shot to make it through life and to be contributing citizens. So
definitely.
Yeah.
What about the work that you're doing to prevent abuse from happening? Are you working kind of with the parents that have sort of been doing this, or is it more of a let's get in front of the issue before it even gets there?
I guess there's two different ways that we work with things. When it comes to the Child and Youth Advocacy Center, the work is done with the non-offending parent and the family members that are connected with that child for that support. And again, how they're attaching with that child, how they're supporting that child, if there's other children who've been abused in the home as well, and how they're going to, reconstruct their lives after this, and how to move forward with that and what those child needs are. And so that's that therapy process. So both through some Connect parenting groups that are done, and some other groups that are done, as well as some therapy that is done by the folks that we have here. The other side is that there's an early intervention program that we have that's called Who Do You Tell, which we take out to schools. And it's a 1 hour program. We go in and we talk about, who do you tell if something is going on in your life that, is pretty scary. And so the difference between keep and speak a secret. So the keep secrets are, the fun surprise birthday party that's coming up. The speak secrets are the ones that are causing harm, that are making you feel awful inside. And sometimes telling their parents may not be the safest person in their life to tell, right?
Sad but true. Yeah.
Sad but true. And we've seen this happen in, athletic programs with gymnastics and things like this. It might be a coach that's doing something or a player on a team that's doing something, whatever that is. Who can they go to if something is disrupting their life in this way? And so that's what the program's about. And we come back for a second time. And actually, we've had a number of disclosures that have come through this process. What that helps to do is it sets the stage that kids first know that it's good to talk about this, that it's okay to talk about this. So when someone's asked them to keep a secret that's this awful, that they don't have to keep it, that there's places they can go to. So that's more of an early intervention type program. The other thing we do is we go out and we do training, and we've done training with churches, we've done training with professionals, with other agencies, with community groups that just want to know more about child abuse, want to know more about how to receive disclosures, and we do that type of training as well. So again, let's not be scared of the language, and let's talk openly about child abuse. Let's talk about sexual abuse and sexual assault, because these are the realities that are happening in our world, and we do need to address them. And so how do we get people comfortable with that language so that we can actually move forward and address these issues and be healthier? And most of us, we all want our kids to grow up to pay their own bills, but to be healthy and to be happy. And so these are ways that we can do that. And so let's move that forward.
Wow, such important work that you all do down there at the Chinook Sexual Assault Center, and such a heavy topic. But thanks so much for being with us today, Christine.
Thank you so much.
Yes, appreciate having you on. Christine Cassie is the CEO of the Chinook Sexual Assault Center in Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.